There was a time not so long ago when I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, the soft hum of the city outside barely reaching my ears. I was physically safe, yet inside my chest a storm raged, a relentless pounding heart, a tightness in my throat, a sudden rush of unease that seemed to flood my entire body. It was confusing, almost surreal. How could I feel so frightened when I was exactly where I wanted to be, surrounded by familiar walls, my own belongings, nothing threatening in sight? The paradox clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I remember glancing out the window, watching people pass by without a care, while inside me the tension spiraled. It was as if my body was acting out a scripted drama that my mind refused to recognize. My senses were screaming danger, but my rational thoughts whispered, "There is no danger here." I was caught between two worlds, one rooted in reality, the other in the gripping grasp of anxiety's invisible chains. This wasn't the first time I'd felt this way, and I'm certain it's familiar to many. We've all had moments when, even amid safety and calm, an inexplicable fear sneaks in, uninvited and relentless. But what's most unsettling isn't the fear itself. It's the confusion, the mismatch between what we see and what we feel. It's the way my hands trembled during a casual conversation at work, or how my breath shortened while laughing with friends, as though the smallest spark could ignite an inferno of dread. At times, fear hovered so close, yet remained nameless and faceless, a phantom without a cause. I tried to make sense of it. I found myself questioning if I was making it up, if I was simply being weak or overly sensitive. Friends would ask, "Are you okay?" But I couldn't pinpoint what to say. Saying, "I'm scared" seemed too broad, too vague. After all, scared of what? That was the question that haunted me. I knew my mind was playing tricks on me, yet my body refused to listen. It was as if I was living in a house wired with alarms that went off randomly, jolting me awake even when everything was quiet. On some days, the feeling was subtle, a quiet, persistent unease like background noise. Other times, it crashed in like thunder, an overwhelming surge of panic that left me clutching the walls of my reality just to stay grounded. And yet, all I wanted was a sign that the storm inside would end, that peace was something I could touch again without fear lurking nearby. I started noticing patterns. The way my mind leapt to worst-case scenarios when nothing had actually happened. The way simple, neutral moments felt charged, like walking on a tightrope over invisible, unforgiving depths. Attempts to relax in peaceful environments sometimes backfired, making me more restless and on edge, not less. These experiences weren't isolated. They connected in a way that felt like an unseen force pulling the strings behind the scenes. I was beginning to see how anxiety wasn't just about feeling nervous. It was deeper, rooted in how my body and mind processed every sensation and thought, distorting the reality around me. It created a world where safety and danger tangled until I couldn't distinguish one from the other. This disconnect between what our senses tell us and what our brains interpret is a perplexing space to inhabit. The heart racing without reason, the breath catching out of nowhere, the body preparing to fight or flee when there's nothing to fight or flee from. All this felt like a betrayal from within. Yet it wasn't betrayal. It was a profound miscommunication between my internal alarm system and the safe environment I was in. What's even more compelling is that these reactions don't just appear out of nowhere. There's a story beneath the surface, a history written in my nervous system that I've learned to carry, often without realizing it. This story shapes the way anxiety plays out, not as a sudden visitor, but as an unwelcome companion persistently shadowing the everyday moments where security should be automatic, where peace should be given. I began to understand that this experience is neither a mark of weakness nor a figment of imagination. It's a complex dance of the body and mind responding to past echoes and present triggers, sometimes blurring the line between safety and threat until that line disappears altogether. At first, this understanding was more unsettling than comforting. If what I felt wasn't all in my head, what was driving this relentless sense of insecurity? How could I begin to untangle this web when it seemed woven deep inside me? It felt like standing in a room full of mirrors, each reflection distorted, showing fragments of truth, but none capturing the whole picture. And yet, beneath the fear and confusion, a faint hope lingered. A hope that the body's wiring wasn't permanent, that the system designed to protect me could learn to recognize safety again. Before I could get there, though, I needed to step back and confront the invisible mechanisms holding me captive. If you're hearing this and recognize parts of this story, the silent tremor of fear in a calm moment, the tug of anxiety where light should shine, you're not alone. The journey to reclaiming safety inside ourselves doesn't start with pushing away the fear or pretending it's not there. It begins with creating a space to understand how deeply anxiety can rewrite our sense of security, and knowing that within this challenge lies a path forward. I want to invite you to walk this path with me, to explore how anxiety's shadow plays out in ways you might not have expected, to uncover what has conditioned your body and mind to respond the way they do. Together, we'll learn what it means when fear arises without danger, and why that is not a failure on your part. This is not a story of immediate fixes or quick answers. It's a journey into the heart of how anxiety rewires our inner world, a journey toward rediscovering the safety that has always been possible, even if it feels hidden right now. And it's the first step toward teaching ourselves to live fully again, beyond the constant sense of alarm. Let's begin. There was a moment during one of those restless nights when I realized something subtle yet profound. My senses had become overstretched, as if every nerve ending was tuned to a frequency far beyond ordinary life. It was more than unease. It was a kind of heightened alertness that I hadn't signed up for. I sat up, listening intently to the soft creaks of the house, my ears straining to decipher each sound. The faintest rustle outside the window made my chest tighten instantly. It was as if my entire being had transformed into a vigilant sentinel, ready to respond even when no real threat existed. This hyper-awareness isn't some minor quirk. It's a deep-seated conditioning within our nervous framework. Imagine a finely woven spider web, stretched taut and sensitive to the slightest vibrations. Now picture that web exposed to storms, disturbances, and the sharp winds of past stress. Each gust leaves it more fragile, yet paradoxically more sensitive, primed to reverberate at even the mildest touch. This intense state of watchfulness often gets mistaken for mere anxiety symptoms, but it's so much more entrenched than fleeting nervousness. On a mundane afternoon at work, I noticed myself tracking every micro-expression a colleague made, analyzing the flicker of a smile or a brief glance. Tiny details that others ignored seemed like codified messages to me, signs warning of impending criticism or rejection. My mind tried to decode motives where none truly existed. This pattern narrowed my view of reality, coloring it with apprehension and doubt. I wasn't interpreting social cues. Instead, I was translating neutral or even positive interactions into potential threats, an exhausting mental acrobatics that no one else around me performed. Similarly, I began to realize how moments that should have brought relaxation or joy instead sparked restlessness. Sitting in a quiet park, I found my thoughts refusing to settle, jumping from one imagined worry to another. Birds chirping, leaves rustling, sounds that normally soothes most, felt intrusive to me, like an uninvited chorus breaking the silence. The contrast was striking. Where others found comfort, I detected unease, a kind of internal discord that pulled me away from calm. One of the most baffling experiences was grappling with fears that lacked direction or specificity. There was no identifiable cause, no clear why, only a nebulous dread hovering just beneath the surface. It's like standing in a dimly lit room without knowing what lies within the shadows. The uncertainty itself breeds the greatest distress. I found it increasingly difficult to articulate what scared me because it wasn't a singular thing, but an overarching, diffuse sensation that seeped into my moments of stillness. My personal struggles with this invisible foe led me to explore the interplay between sensory perception and emotional response in ways I never considered. I discovered that experiences once considered neutral, or even safe, could become triggers simply because the nervous setup had rewritten its own manual over time. The system entrusted with keeping me alive was now operating on outdated intelligence, erring on the side of caution by flagging anything ambiguous as dangerous. This rewiring, often imperceptible, creates a relentless feedback loop reinforcing uneasiness. At work, for instance, a simple email notification would spark an adrenaline surge, gearing me up for confrontation that never arrived. The pulse quickened automatically, not out of choice, but as a reflex ingrained through past encounters and stressors. The unpredictability of these reactions added a layer of frustration, making each day a negotiation between intent and involuntary response. I understood then that this internal state did not yield easily to logic or reason, as it bypassed conscious approval to act on a primal plane. In gatherings with friends, I noticed how my ability to engage fully became compromised. While laughter and easy conversation buzzed around me, internal tension knitted my brow, and an undercurrent of anticipation whispered that something was amiss. There was no clear sign, no overt reason to withdraw, yet the energy inside me bristled with a silent threat. It was as though I was wearing an invisible armor, simultaneously protecting and isolating me from genuine connection. Another revelation came when I reflected on the difficulty to unwind even when the environment was calm. I tried leisurely baths, meditation, and even moments of quiet solitude, hoping my system would ease. Instead, I noticed my limbs occasionally twitching, breath hitching unpredictably, and sleep evading me despite exhaustion. It was as if my body existed in two timelines, one present and safe, the other anchored in an ancient survival mode forever scanning for danger. This conditioning also seeped into the daily interpretations of my experiences. I realized that subtle, neutral feedback, like a neutral facial expression or an ambiguous tone of voice, was often translated into negative assessments. A slight frown was read as disapproval, a pause as impending criticism. This persistent skew in perception acted like a filter, distorting the lens through which I viewed the world and the people I interacted with. It was a cognitive trap where the default expectation became caution, suspicion, and unease. Now, consider how this applies when you face situations that are objectively low risk, but still trigger your internal alarms. You might notice your muscles tightening in a familiar room, your mind racing through worst-case scenarios while your surroundings remain calm and predictable. This mismatch challenges your ability to trust what you see, hear, and feel. Yet deep within, there's a part of you eager to break free from these automatic alerts and reclaim a space of calm presence. What I learned through living this fragmented reality is that the system responding too quickly or too intensely to everyday input is not your enemy. It's a protector operating from a place of overcaution. Recognizing the nuances of this state, from heightened awareness to the misinterpretation of harmless stimuli, opens the door to understanding how deeply these conditioned responses have settled into habitual ways of responding. With this recognition, the path to gently recalibrating those instincts becomes clearer, and the possibility for reclaiming steadiness returns within reach. In the quiet moments when the world seemed still, I noticed my senses sharpening in unexpected ways, almost as if my skin had become a living radar, picking up on subtleties others might effortlessly overlook. It was during a routine visit to a crowded cafe when this sensation struck me with vivid clarity. Surrounding chatter, clinking cups, and the hum of casual conversations created a familiar backdrop, yet I found myself entangled in a heightened awareness of each passing glance, every nuanced shift in tone. My muscles tensed without conscious invitation, preparing me for a confrontation that never came. The energy in the room, ordinary to most, sent ripples of unease coursing beneath my surface. This experience introduced me to a profound internal paradox, feeling trapped within my own vigilance, caught between wanting to engage fully and an instinctive urge to withdraw. It felt as though my nervous system was rehearsing a defensive playbook scripted long ago, triggered by subtle details that should have elicited no reaction. Imagine a finely tuned instrument suddenly out of sync with the orchestra it's part of, each note slightly off, creating a dissonance both confusing and draining. This dissonance shaped my perceptions and responses in ways that often felt beyond my control. At the office, I found myself repeatedly caught in mental loops, replaying casual remarks made during meetings with exaggerated significance. A colleague's neutral comment might suddenly seem loaded with hidden critique or judgment. Those moments felt like invisible mines scattered beneath familiar ground, prompting me to tread cautiously, second-guessing even the most innocuous interactions. I realized that my internal maps of social engagement had been redrawn, mapping suspicion where humor and kindness previously resided. On a more subtle level, I discovered how the restless energy inside could amplify physical sensations that normally would pass unnoticed. The flutter of my heartbeat felt like an urgent alarm. The flush of warmth across my cheeks became a sign of impending embarrassment. Even shallow breathing morphed into a warning siren. Each of these reactions fed into a cycle of confirmation, my body signaling threat, my mind interpreting those signs as validation. It was a rich, though exhausting, loop that took persistent effort to unravel. One evening, seeking refuge in a park after a particularly taxing day, I stumbled upon a new layer of this experience. I sat on a weathered wooden bench beneath the canopy of rustling trees, hoping for a moment of release. Yet, instead of finding calm, my gaze darted to flickering shadows among the leaves, and I found myself scanning every movement, branches swaying, birds taking flight, as potential harbingers of danger. The quiet sanctuary became an arena of hyper-awareness, my senses finely attuned to every shift in light and sound. It was reminiscent of a soldier stationed in a foreign land, eyes constantly searching for threats amidst the unknown. This state of persistent alertness did not reflect a desire to be fearful. Rather, it felt like an automatic defense mechanism, an ingrained survival strategy operating beneath my awareness. It became clear to me that the tension woven through my muscles wasn't a personal failing, but a pattern tracing back to how my internal warning system had been conditioned over time. Perhaps in circumstances not readily accessible to memory, the nervous system had learned to prepare for the worst, even when the present moment was benign. Looking back, I also noticed distinct shifts in how my mind processed uncertainty. Normally, ambiguity invites curiosity or openness, but for me, it nudged a creeping sense of mistrust. Situations that others might accept with ease stirred imaginative scenarios filled with what-ifs, each more daunting than the last. This mental cascade fed anxiety's grip, and the anticipation of discomfort often eclipsed reality itself. The fog of imagined peril cast shadows over daily experiences, making even familiar places feel tinged with unpredictability. A particularly vivid illustration unfolded during a family gathering. Surrounded by people I loved, laughter flowing around me, I caught myself withdrawing, my heart pounding with inexplicable dread. I couldn't pinpoint a threatening event or exchange. Everything appeared normal on the surface. Yet the sensation of impending crisis gripped me tightly. It was as if my nervous system's internal alarm pulled invisible strings, orchestrating a performance of caution where none was warranted. This dissonance between outer calm and inner turmoil was both isolating and disorienting. At that moment, I recognized that even environments designed to nurture connection and joy could become battlegrounds for my heightened senses. The contrast between external warmth and internal tension deepened my understanding of how deeply ingrained these responses had become. This realization motivated me to seek ways to ease the relentless vigilance and invite genuine ease back into my life. I found that engaging with my surroundings through grounded, sensory experiences offered small but meaningful relief. Planting my feet firmly on the ground, feeling textures with intention, paying attention to the rhythm of my breath, all grounded me momentarily in present reality. These intentional acts served as gentle reminders that not every signal demands a heightened response. Like tending a garden over time, gradually these moments reinforced a new pattern of awareness, one where safety began to reclaim its rightful place within my perception. Navigating this terrain required patience and self-compassion. Each step toward recalibration was a quiet act of rebellion against the automatic triggers ingrained by past conditioning. Though progress wasn't linear, seasons of comfort mixed with storms of unease, I began to gather tools for meeting internal alarms with curiosity instead of resistance. Recognizing the layers of hyper-awareness and unshakable alertness allowed me to reclaim a measure of peace, demonstrating that even the most persistent vigilance can soften when met with understanding and care. Sometimes, late at night, the quiet becomes overwhelming, not because of sound, but because of how stillness amplifies every internal signal. I recall one particular evening when I sat on my couch, trying to lose myself in a book. Instead, my jaw clenched involuntarily, and my fingers twitched against the fabric of my sleeve. The sensation wasn't tied to any news or worry but streamed directly from within, a pulse of tension that refused to ebb. It was as though my body was replaying old alerts, honed from previous battles I never quite realized I was fighting. On that night, a realization dawned on me. My physical form was enacting a story authored long ago, one that I hadn't consciously signed off on. The subtle muscle contractions and restlessness had less to do with today's circumstances and more to do with ancestral echoes lodged in my cells. Consider a violin string carrying the memory of every note ever played. Now imagine that string vibrating not only from present touch, but from the ghost of melodies past. This embodied memory disrupts the present, causing a misplaced readiness for an undefined storm. During a lunch break at work, I noticed how my hands hovered hesitantly over my keyboard, reluctant to strike keys as if trapped in slow motion. A passing comment from a coworker about deadlines, innocuous in context, triggered a surge of tension across my chest, sharp and unyielding. The instantaneous flare-up made the air feel thicker and challenged my ability to focus. Struggling to recenter, I realized I was inhabiting a battleground where invisible forces manipulated my reactions, blurring rational thinking with primal instinct. Outside under a blue sky, while walking through a busy street market, I watched families haggling over colorful vegetables and children darting between stalls with laughter. The lively scene should have been delightful, yet a persistent unease shadowed my steps. A car horn blared suddenly, and my muscles tensed reflexively. My skin prickled in anticipation, as though predicting chaos on the horizon, although the flow of pedestrians remained steady and the environment stayed safe. Within that moment, I grasped how deeply such anticipatory anxiety could embed itself, rewriting my internal narrative to prioritize survival over presence. I recalled telling my closest friend about this experience. "It's exhausting," I confessed, "like I'm both here and somewhere else, constantly bracing for something I can't even name." She looked at me, eyes steady, and asked gently, "Do you think your body's trying to protect you in the only way it knows?" That question lingered with me. Protection born from uncertainty doesn't always wear clear labels. It often manifests as an instinctive tightening, a readiness that disrupts peace. Sometimes, the defense mechanisms we develop become the very chains that restrain us. When I pushed myself to examine the triggers beyond surface level, I uncovered moments where silence itself became a source of unrest. In a cozy room with soft lighting, instead of sinking into relaxation, I observed my breath halting irregularly, as if expecting sudden turmoil. The quiet hummed in the background, a deceptive lull that heightened my alertness instead of calming me. This paradox puzzled me. How solitude, typically restorative, spurred an alertness disproportionate to any external circumstance. One afternoon, I attended a small gathering of old friends. As voices intertwined and stories unfolded, I noticed an almost imperceptible tightening in my throat, a brief surge of heat behind my eyes. It wasn't sadness or fatigue. It was a silent warning signal that this environment could threaten my fragile calm, despite all external comfort. I attempted to engage, yet a veil hovered. The sensation that I was performing, monitoring every expression and every word as if survival depended on my vigilance. At another point, I discovered a tendency to misinterpret others' intentions, which complicated my relationships beyond what I had initially understood. A neutral remark could be decoded as criticism, a delayed text as rejection, a casual glance as judgment. This filtering altered my entire social landscape, like wearing tinted glasses that warped familiar faces and conversations into unfamiliar terrain. The gap between what others communicated and what I received stretched wider each day, isolating me in an internal maze formed by ambiguity and doubt. What struck me deeply was the way my body rehearsed fight or flight scenarios without any conscious direction. Whether confronted with deadlines, friendly requests, or quiet evenings, my form would tense defensively, muscles coiled, breath shallow. The incongruence reshaped my sense of reality, as if my physical state constantly disputed the safety presented by my surroundings. It reminded me of a wild horse tethered in a stable, ready to bolt at a moment's notice though there's no open field in sight. Conversations with a therapist opened doors to previously inaccessible insights. We explored how the body might retain memories of stress and trauma stored as physical tension over time. These somatic imprints exerted profound influence over daily functioning, subtly steering thoughts and emotions. Through guided awareness and gradual release techniques, I began to unravel this complex web, a delicate process of reclaiming agency over parts of myself that had long awaited compassionate attention. This journey required me to become a detective within my own experience, learning to differentiate between genuine signals of danger and echoes of conditioned overreaction. By cultivating mindful curiosity toward sensations previously dismissed or avoided, I gradually discovered dimmed alarms could eventually retreat. Learning to listen to my body as an ally rather than an adversary transformed uncertainty into possibility. Each small breakthrough brought me closer to inhabiting a space where vulnerability and strength coexist, allowing peace to take root in places once dominated by tension. Late one afternoon, during a routine stroll around my neighborhood, an unexpected sensation took me by surprise. The sun was beginning to dip below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. My steps slowed as a sudden wave of restlessness coursed through me, not triggered by any external threat, but an inner turmoil brewing without warning. It resembled a tightly coiled spring inside my chest, ready to snap even as the world around me remained calm and undisturbed. In that moment, I recognized a powerful disconnect between my physical state and the reassuring environment enveloping me. The internal unrest sparked a cascade of heightened bodily awareness. My hands tingled inexplicably, while a prickling warmth crept up my spine. Instead of embracing the evening's tranquility, I became acutely alert to every passing sound: the distant bark of a dog, the faint rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen breeze. Each stimulus seemed amplified, magnified into potential alarms that demanded urgent attention. I was simultaneously present and absent from the scene, a spectator trapped within a body rehearsing vigilance far beyond necessity. Later, seated at my desk, a simple email notification would sometimes jitter my pulse and tighten my shoulders. The message itself posed no threat. Yet, my body prepared for confrontation as if expecting criticism or unexpected demands. This pattern frustrated my attempts to remain grounded in work, as moments meant for productivity turned into episodes of internal tension. I began to observe how my physical responses frequently anticipated danger even when my mind understood otherwise. The gap between intellect and instinct stretched wider, planting seeds of confusion. One evening, as twilight gave way to night, I found myself lingering at the edge of a park bench, watching families enjoying the fading light. Amid laughter and playful shouts, I was gripped by an indefinable agitation that refused to relent. Each joyful sound sharpened my senses, urging me away from ease and toward alertness. The vibrant scene, so full of life and safety, instead became a stage where my body prepared for an unseen peril. The irony gnawed at me. How was it possible to feel vulnerable in the presence of such happiness? During conversations with close friends, I noticed subtle signals feeding my uncertainty. A delayed response, a brief silence, or a shadow crossing a smile often spiraled in my mind into reflections of rejection or judgment. The absence of threat only deepened the mystery of my increasing unease. In time, the gulf between intent and perception shaped my social interactions, creating invisible barriers where connection should have flourished. The notion that fear could be woven from thin air became clearer, unsettling yet significant in understanding the landscape within. I recall one night lying awake, muscles twitching involuntarily, breath irregular despite an inviting bed and calm surroundings. Rather than surrendering to rest, a restless energy buzzed under my skin, sporadically intensifying like electrical storms contained inside my limbs. The very quiet that usually brings peace felt lacking, replaced by an internal rhythm that defied sleep. In attempting meditation as a remedy, I confronted waves of distraction and discomfort I hadn't anticipated. The mind's attempts to quiet became a battleground against the bodily storm raging beneath my consciousness. In response, I resolved to explore alternate ways of reclaiming calm. Entering nature became a refuge. Though contrary to expectations, moments of intentional stillness sometimes provoke tension rather than relief. Sitting beneath towering trees, feeling the rough bark under my fingertips, I noticed how bodily sensations oscillated unpredictably. Sometimes, the serenity of the environment loosened the grip of unease. Other times, it seemed to awaken latent restlessness, like water flickering under moonlight, beautiful but ever-shifting. The contrast challenged preconceived expectations about safety and relaxation. At work, the ambient noise of conversations, the clatter of keyboards, and the hum of electronic devices occasionally triggered pulses of agitation. Rather than fading into the background, these sounds punctuated my awareness with unexpected sharpness. My mind frequently traced patterns, overemphasizing minor discrepancies or pauses, as if scanning for subtle signals. This overanalysis created a tension that reflected less the external stimuli and more an internal preparedness to respond. The cycle made concentration difficult, as if my focus was pulled between reality and an almost cinematic forecast of what might go wrong. I began experimenting with simple grounding techniques to counterbalance involuntary tension. One evening, while practicing mindful breathing, I shifted attention fully to the sensations of the air entering and leaving my nostrils. As I traced the coolness descending and the warmth rising, my attention settled away from imagined threats and toward the tangible present. Gradually, my muscles relaxed incrementally. The frantic pace within my mind softened. These moments felt like islands of refuge in an ocean that sometimes felt turbulent. Another turning point involved recognizing the impact of unrecognized physical tension on my emotional landscape. I practiced noticing tightness in my jaw or shoulders and consciously releasing those areas as if uncoiling trapped energy. The subtle act of loosening my grip, both literally and metaphorically, introduced a sense of agency amidst automatic responses. Such rituals offered unexpected opportunities to retrain my body's habitual state from one of constant defense toward openness and receptivity. At family gatherings, where I once observed withdrawal, I tried intentionally anchoring myself through sensory connection. Feeling the fabric of my chair against my skin, noticing the taste of a morsel slowly, and focusing on the cadence of a friend's voice enabled a presence that momentarily dissolved anticipatory tension. These tangible anchors counteracted the sensation of floating in apprehension, allowing the experience of belonging to emerge step by step. Rather than battling anxiety head-on, these small interventions created space for relief. Through these subtle shifts, I realized that the body's readiness for danger, even in peaceful contexts, is neither random nor entirely uncontrollable. It reflects patterns that can be softened and reshaped. The journey involves learning to listen carefully and respond with gentleness, cultivating habits that nurture equilibrium. It is not about erasing vigilance, but recalibrating it to align with actual safety cues woven through daily life. The challenge, and promise, is to live with an embodied resilience that honors both sensitivity and steadiness. I remember a day when my surroundings appeared utterly harmless. A sunlit cafe, buzzing softly with calm conversation and the clinking of cups. Yet beneath that warm atmosphere, a restless tension simmered inside, sharp and unyielding. My hands trembled subtly beneath the tablecloth, betraying the composed exterior I tried to maintain. It wasn't a fleeting discomfort. It was as if an unseen force had rewired my inner compass to detect danger lurking beneath benign moments. I glanced around, watching others laugh and relax, baffled as my nerves remained tightly wound, scanning for unseen signs of threat. At that moment, I realized hypervigilance reached far beyond acknowledging external hazards. It invaded my perception, magnifying details that others bypassed effortlessly. Each subtle flicker of expression from a nearby patron, an eyebrow's slight arch, a twitch at the corner of a mouth, became a cipher demanding deciphering. The inability to interpret these neutral cues as neutral only deepened my isolation. It wasn't fatigue or distraction. My senses were on high alert, unraveling social threads into tangled assumptions. Conversations bubbled around me, but my attention fractured, bouncing between what was said and what might be hidden underneath. One afternoon, I struggled through a crowded subway ride where muffled voices, shuffling feet, and flashing advertisements collided in chaotic symphony. Instead of simply observing, my awareness tightened like a noose. A random cough from a stranger triggered a wave of unease, nodding toward bodily discomfort larger than flu or fatigue, an invisible threat elevated by my own mind. The onslaught of stimuli, lights flickering overhead, the metallic screech of rails, and anonymous eyes briefly meeting mine, felt amplified manifold. Instead of blending invisibly into this shared space, I was the only occupant sensing imminent peril, trapped inside a hypersensitive shell. This intense alertness brought paradoxical exhaustion. I was consumed by constant readiness, but also crushed by the overwhelming task of sifting through signals for genuine risk. To others, I might have looked simply distracted or withdrawn, yet inside, a battlefield unfolded where primal instincts clashed with conscious reassurance. Every heartbeat magnified, every breath sharpened, as if my nervous circuits were scrambling to solve a puzzle without clear instructions. The tension became a silent scream, echoing within an internal chamber no one else could hear. One evening, seeking refuge, I settled in a dimly lit room filled with books. The silence enveloped me, but calm was elusive. My skin prickled, a low hum rising beneath my ribs, as though a storm brewed invisibly. Shadows lengthened along the walls, though no real threat was present. I became acutely aware of the space between myself and the other objects, a distance charged with unspoken warnings. Every creak of the floor or distant murmur morphed into signals warranting vigilance, invalidating the sanctuary I yearned for. I realized this kind of tension wasn't solely physical. It was an intricate pattern engraved deeper than muscle or nerve, shaped over time to predispose me to constant watchfulness. In conversations with friends, I noticed how my interpretations leaned toward suspicion, despite evidence of goodwill. A simple hesitation before a reply became a perceived slight, and a casual glance morphed into judgment. These distortions formed a lens that warped interpersonal dynamics, erecting unseen walls between me and kindness. One trusted companion gently asked, "What would it take to trust this moment without fearing what could follow?" The question lingered unanswered but seeded transformation, a challenge to untangle my perceptions from inherited fears. Workplaces, supposedly predictable and functional, sometimes triggered waves of internal discord. Ambient noises, typing, muffled discussions, shifting chairs, became punctuations of uncertainty. I counted seconds between phrases, seeking cues to affirm stability, yet the silence often spoke louder than words, hinting at disruptions beyond reality. On one occasion, a coworker's neutral tone climbed dramatically into an imagined critique, setting off adrenaline surges. That moment underscored how deeply automatic responses could hijack my experience, compelling me to battle phantom adversaries rather than focus on tangible tasks. An even more peculiar phenomenon emerged during what should have been restorative rest. Attempts to relax in my own sanctuary backfired. Sitting still triggered muscle twitches like electric sparks arcing beneath my skin, while my breath shortened unpredictably, as if rehearsing fight or flight in a staged scene. It was akin to standing on the edge of a cliff in a dense fog, aware that danger could lie hidden, unable to fully rely on senses dulled by uncertainty. The very act of surrender felt foreign, intensifying rather than lessening inner turmoil. This heightened alertness taught me another truth. The visceral nature of anxiety is as much about anticipatory survival instincts as response to immediate threats. It operates unpredictably, seeping into moments we're conditioned to see as safe or mundane. When subtle physical sensations like a tightened neck, fluttering stomach, or restless limbs signal alarm, they demand interpretation beyond surface logic. Learning to discern which alarms are echoes of past storms versus valid signals remains a complex dance, one requiring patience, practice, and self-compassion. Now, consider how this manifests during daily encounters with people and places. The environment may hold no real danger, but your sensory system reacts impulsively, like a finely tuned instrument scared by a discordant note far removed from reality. Recognizing this subtle distortion becomes crucial, not to dismiss or fight it, but to gently invite recalibration, a retraining to experience life unfiltered by hyperalert shadows. It's an ongoing process, like teaching a seasoned watchman that the night has softened, and not every flicker in the dark demands his constant guard. Reflecting on this journey so far, I sense a quiet shift stirring within me, a subtle weaving together of threads that once seemed disparate, now converging into an intricate tapestry of understanding. It's as though I have been navigating a vast, winding river whose currents carry both turbulence and calm, each bend revealing new currents of awareness that challenge me to reckon with the very essence of my experience. There's a profound tension in this current, a dance between the pull of old patterns and the beckoning of something uncharted, delicate yet vital. In the space between awareness and surrender, I notice that anxiety's grip is less a prison than a labyrinth, complex and beguiling. Each passage twists and turns, seemingly trapping but inviting exploration. I hold no map, only the resonance of sensations and the subtle echoes of past echoes stirring within me. The landscape is both internal and external, a terrain where the body's language intermingles with the silent narratives we carry, creating intricate layers that defy simple interpretation. It is a terrain I walk with cautious curiosity, navigating shadows but growing increasingly attuned to the faintest glimmers of light. There's a peculiar duality to this experience, an inner voice whispering caution while another longs for liberation. Sometimes, I hear my breath softly urging me to listen more closely to the rhythm that usually goes unnoticed, a cadence interrupted but not silenced. It's as if my nervous system has become a symphony playing out of sync, each instrument vying for dominance. Yet through attentive patience, harmonies begin to emerge. I witness moments when tension loosens its hold, when time twists and stretches, allowing space for rhythms unhurried and genuine to surface. Engaging with this internal landscape feels like learning a new language, one without words but rich with expression. The dialogue unfolds quietly between me and my bodily sensations, a conversation where each tremor and pulse speaks volumes. It requires me to soften my gaze inward, relinquishing judgments and embracing ambiguity. What do you want to tell me? I ask, coaxing the language out from shadows. Often, the answer lingers in silence, or appears through fleeting impressions, a warmth settling in a hand, a slowing heartbeat, the gentle wave of calm rising after the tempest. There are moments when this internal dialogue reveals a truth that is both unsettling and tender, that fragile security does not hinge solely on external assurances, but arises from within the landscape of my own body's wisdom. It calls me to reconsider the very fabric of safety, no longer dependent on conditions around me, but woven through my breath, posture, and presence. The boundaries between threat and sanctuary blur in this awareness, inviting a redefinition born from experience rather than expectation. Sometimes, I imagine this process as tending a quiet garden, where seeds of trust have been overshadowed by brambles of fear. The work is slow, patient, requiring presence and acceptance of discomfort alongside blossoming growth. There is a rhythm to the effort, a cycle of noticing, releasing, and returning, where progress is measured not in absolutes but in gentle shifts. This garden is not a static refuge but a living ecosystem shaped by seasons of struggle and renewal, requiring me to become both gardener and witness to its unfolding. As I continue walking this path, I sense that the journey is less about conquering anxiety's forces and more about inviting collaboration, transforming the frantic sentinel into a watchful guardian who discerns when to rise and when to rest. It challenges me to step into a partnership with my own nervous system, learning its language, respecting its history, and gradually guiding it toward a more balanced state. This partnership is neither quick nor linear, rather a winding dance where setbacks mingle with breakthroughs. There is a growing recognition that safety, elusive as it may have seemed, is accessible through the tender attunement to the body's signals, the whispers that precede anxiety's roar. Cultivating this attunement demands presence and patience, allowing space for vulnerability without surrender to overwhelm. I begin to see moments of reprieve not as rare reprieves, but as invitations, signposts toward a horizon where calm does not require absence of challenge, but an expanded capacity to inhabit challenge with groundedness. In sharing this with you now, I invite you to consider your own inner landscape. The way your body might carry messages seldom voiced, the interplay of alerts and ease woven through your daily experience. There is no need to rush toward resolution or fix what feels complex. Instead, perhaps we can cultivate a posture of curiosity, gentle inquiry, and trust in the subtle wisdom embedded within ourselves. Together, we approach a moment where the threads converge into a new pattern, one awaiting our attention and care, ready to reveal its shape as we step forward. As days passed, I began to notice how the constant hum of unease gradually softened, not because circumstances had suddenly changed, but because I chose to meet the world differently. It wasn't about erasing the tension or silencing the trembles of uncertainty, but about embracing them as misunderstood messengers rather than enemies. I started to recognize that the restlessness coursing through me was not a signal of weakness, but a complex language my being spoke when caught between past wounds and present safety. In this shift, I discovered a surprising grace, the possibility that safety blooms from within when we cease struggling against our own signals and instead listen. One evening, as dusk settled softly over the cityscape, I sat by the window watching shadows stretch across the pavement, their shapes uncertain yet familiar. The quiet was not empty but layered, alive with depths I had never truly acknowledged until now. In that moment, I realized how much life I had been living from a place of alertness, always ready to respond, but seldom present enough to rest. The constant readiness that once felt like a cage unveiled itself as a complex dance, sometimes protective, sometimes misguided, but ultimately part of my journey. What had once been a source of fear began to resolve into an invitation to cultivate patience for myself and the subtle rhythms that pulse within. Meeting discomfort in this new way lifted a veil that had long clouded my vision. The moments where unease pushed against peace no longer dictated my story. Instead, I learned to witness them with gentle curiosity, allowing those waves to rise and fall without losing my footing. It was like standing in a river. Sometimes strong currents pulled me, yet I learned to bend and flow rather than resist. Slowly, surrender took on a new meaning, not submission, but a conscious choice to move with life rather than against it. In this unfolding, the impossible paradox emerged, strength born from softness, clarity born from vulnerability. I recall a conversation with a close friend who once said, "Courage isn't about fighting the storm, it's about dancing in the rain." Those words resonated deeply as I reflected on my path. The internal storms that had once seemed relentless began to feel like invitations to learn new steps in an unpredictable choreography. Rather than waiting for every cloud to clear before stepping outside, I realized I could find rhythm and light even amidst lingering shadows. This mindset shift didn't erase the moments of discomfort, but transformed what they meant to me, grounding them within a larger, richer story of resilience. In many ways, this journey has been less about conquering elusive calm and more about weaving a relationship with complexity, acknowledging that peace is not a static destination, but a dynamic encounter. It means honoring each tremor of anxiety as part of my evolving narrative, not as a defect needing correction. I came to understand that healing is not linear. It bends and loops like a river carving its path through shifting terrain. The moments of quiet confidence are interlaced with vulnerability, and embracing this mosaic has given me a profound sense of freedom. Now, when uncertainty surfaces, I remind myself that presence is my anchor. It allows me to witness my sensations and thoughts without being swept away, not as an act of willpower, but as an act of compassion. This compassionate presence opens doors to insight and transformation, gently untying knots shaped by years of habituated responses. I feel more connected to myself, more available to others, and more capable of moving through daily life with a steadiness that didn't feel possible before. I share this not to offer a polished solution, but to invite dialogue between you and your own experience. Perhaps you carry shadows of immeasurable depth, unseen yet unavoidable, whispering fears that defy logic. Maybe you've grown accustomed to wrestling unseen adversaries that drain your energy and obscure your joy. I want you to know there is grace in allowance and power in tender awareness. The sensorium of sensation we sometimes fear can become a portal to renewed safety and profound self-understanding. As I look ahead, I carry hope rooted in lived truth, that the restless stirrings in us do not dictate our story's end. We possess within an enduring capacity to reframe what feels dangerous into what can teach and nurture. Life invites us to learn new languages, body, mind, and spirit, weaving together stories that do not ignore struggle but transcend it by welcoming every facet of our being. In this ongoing exploration, I find myself not chasing peace as an external prize, but cultivating it as an unfolding landscape inside, a sanctuary built on acceptance, trust, and the courage to be wholly present, even amidst uncertainty.